Greetings, I'm Emily Wilson, Communication Director at Innosphere Ventures, where I am here with Innosphere CEO Mike Freeman and also our entrepreneur guest of honor, Melissa Krebs, who's the founder and CEO of GelSana and Associate Professor at Colorado School of Mines. Innosphere Ventures Funded in Colorado series showcases success stories of companies that recently closed a funding round, or maybe they just completed a successful acquisition as well. In these 15-minute interviews, founders share their lessons learned on attracting and raising capital, and also provide advice to other entrepreneurs and explain what worked and maybe more importantly, even what didn't work, in hopes of helping their fellow entrepreneurs close financing rounds. To let you know, you can always watch all of our Funded in Colorado series and conversations on Innosphere's blog page. Innosphere, we are a commercialization and incubation program and also operate a seed stage venture capital fund to accelerate job creation and entrepreneurship for high-tech companies. And we are very excited to, we were very excited to announce just recently our investment into GelSana Therapeutics, which was our fund's very first investment into a Colorado School of Mines company. So Mike will get into more of those detailed questions with Dr. Krebs here soon. So before I turn the interview over to Mike, because he is the one who worked closely with Melissa on that pre-seed investment that our company just recently received from our Innosphere Fund, Melissa, can you quickly tell us about your startup company, the problem it's solving, but we're really interested also in your background as a faculty founder and what motivated you to get into academics, what your role is at the Colorado School of Mines, and just a little bit more about your background and why you became an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. So I am now an associate professor up at Colorado School of Mines in Chemical and Biological Engineering. And I became interested in biomaterials-based research even before I went back to school for my PhD years ago, when I realized the power that different polymer materials could have in healing and helping to heal the human body. So I obtained a PhD in biomedical engineering with my research focusing in tissue regeneration, and I've continued working in this area for my faculty position. And our group's research is really working with different biomaterials that have intrinsic healing effects or that can be loaded with drugs that can help promote healing. And we've looked at different applications within our group with our expertise focusing on the materials themselves. But the particular application that we've formed this company around is for our wound healing materials. And so in this, we've been working on developing hydrogels. We believed that hydrogels could really have beneficial properties for wound healing in that they contain a lot of water. They help create a moist environment. They can maintain sterility and keep bacteria out to help prevent infections. They can allow good oxygen transfer to help the tissue regenerate, and they can provide drugs to the area to help the patient heal up that wound, depending on what the particular application is. And so we developed these really promising materials. We've done studies in animals and they're looking really great. And so I really got to the point where I was thinking about what are the next steps. And so we could continue, and we obviously will continue to study this academically, looking at the different impacts that different molecules may have on wound healing and different materials. But also, can we take these really exciting new materials that we created in our lab and actually get them out there to these patients that really legitimately need new technologies to help them?
Yes, that's great that you're taking it that step further. So we are wondering, did you envision having both an academic and an entrepreneurial career?
So it's something that I would say that I've kind of toyed with that idea over the years. I really enjoy more the research that's on more of what I would say the translational side or the application side, a little bit more than the purely basic science research. And that's probably why I picked engineering, many years ago in order to study and actually make new products that could be useful to people. So it's something that I've always kind of thought about, but once you get an academic position, you're so entrenched in trying to do everything that position alone entails. So you have to teach and you have to manage research and raise funds for your academic group's research, and do all of the associated service that you need to do as a university professor. And it can become very hard to figure out, well, how can I really juggle even more on top of that? So it's something that, yeah, I've toyed with that idea, but I never really knew how to even start that, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a lot on your plate. So how are you managing your Colorado School of Mines faculty role and your startup responsibilities?
Yeah, so at Colorado School of Mines, we're allowed to spend 20% of our time outside of our academic position on external activities. And that can be in a variety of different things that we can do, whether it's consulting or higher service, external service, things like that. But one of the things that you can do is entrepreneurial focused. And so there are professors that choose to start up companies and try to get their technologies out into the market. And we hit a point this past year where I realized that if I want these really promising materials to get out there, they're not quite at the stage where a big company is going to come and just license that straight out. They need a little bit more work. It's not necessarily academic work, but it's perfect for forming a startup, getting that product further through the development pipeline. And so I just decided to give it a try and use my kind of extra time, if you will. So it certainly adds to the load, but I think as professors, we're pretty good at juggling a lot of things. So just keep juggling. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I know when I first heard of GelSana Therapeutics, I just knew that you were a company focused on novel wound healing solutions, and of course learned a little bit more during your capital raise with the Innosphere Fund. So I'll hand it over to Mike Freeman to ask you a few more questions about that process.
Thanks, Emily, and Melissa, thanks again for joining us. This edition of Funded in Colorado is a little bit different in that we were connected through the Innosphere Fund to Melissa through Will Vaughn, who's the technology transfer director at the Colorado School of Mines. And one aspect of Innosphere that's not always obvious is that we've got deep relationships with the three kind of primary research universities here in Colorado. And so this is a great example of that connection, frankly, to Will and to School of Mines. And so how this started for us was an introduction to Melissa probably last spring, and some initial conversations which you heard from her about the research, and really digging into the thought process around commercializing the technology, regulatory path to market, total capital needed. And we spent several months working with Melissa to really better understand the technology and the application, and got really excited really about Melissa personally and her capability, and then also the product, and ultimately decided to make a seed investment into GelSana. And the question, Melissa, I have for you is, we really enjoy working with faculty who are inventing and being entrepreneurial. Not an easy journey, as you've already discussed. But one thing that's oftentimes not obvious to the outside world is all the work that has to be done early on in the research before even a company is put together. And I thought it'd be really interesting just to have you for a minute or two talk about how did you really think about getting funding into the research that ultimately led to the startup? Because for many faculty, that's the key success point, is being able to secure funding, whether it's internal to the university or outside grants. Just maybe talk a little bit about how you got the product to the point it was ready for a seed investment.
Yeah, that's a good point. So part of, obviously I have a research lab at Colorado School of Mines, And we've been pursuing biomaterials research for a while, but just like trying to fund a company in a way, you also have to figure out how am I going to fund my lab at School of Mines. It's not like we're provided money necessarily to continue to do that. And so you look towards major grant agencies, and you can diversify your funding. So not just the big federal grant agencies, but foundation funds. Sometimes there's internal university funds that you can apply for and compete for. And so over the years, I've looked at all these different sources. And so we've been lucky enough to be funded by a wide variety. And so we've had foundations that are disease specific that have funded our work over time. We've been funded by NSF, by NIH. And so just kind of a variety of sources, but you have to write a competitive enough grant application with some preliminary data in order to be funded for kind of the next piece of work. And so with this, with our wound healing gels, we started really with an idea along, years ago at this point, several years ago, and we did some preliminary studies and proved that there's some kind of meat to this idea. It really will work scientifically enough that we can put together our grant proposals, raise money there. So then you get a little bit more money in the door that's specific to that topic. And then you keep researching and pursuing. And for us in this biomedical space, what we're really doing is we're making materials. We can do some testing with cells, and then we have to do testing with animals. And so each of these requires increasing amounts of expense. And so you raise money according to kind of the next immediate scope of work. And I think for the biomedical space, it's really important to try to get at least to some preliminary animal studies, because things can behave so differently in the lab compared to when you put them actually in living creatures. And so having some animal data that proves that you have this hypothesis, here's how you think that your system works, and here's how it really seems to be working in animals. And then of course, there's still a ways to go before you get it into clinical trials. But establishing that ground research and that proof of concept that your idea is not just an idea, but it actually has some weight behind it scientifically that you can back up is certainly super important before trying to start a company, I think.
That was a great overview. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the seed investment that the Innosphere Fund made is not a huge amount of money. It's to fund some milestones. Why don't you talk about how you feel you're doing there, and then maybe a look to the future. How do you think about another fundraise and kind of the total commercialization process that you feel like you're going to need to take GelSana through? Just kind of high level, how do you see that unfolding over the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So pre-investment, we had managed to get data that was basically up through mouse studies. And then as we look at putting this product ultimately into the clinic, how do we do that, right? And so what we've done is we've formed GelSana. We are going to take the information and everything that we've learned so far, and we need to, in order to get it to market, we have some more animal trials to do, and then ultimately clinical trials in the biomedical space. Of course, it can be pretty expensive. And so as a startup company, you have to think about how am I going to guide my product through this entire pathway, which, it can be many years and many millions of dollars, and it feels a little bit overwhelming at the beginning to think about that, but it's important to really lay out a plan, just like you're saying. So what we've been thinking about is using our pre-seed money to help inform our product development. And in our particular situation, we're looking at using these hydrogels that we fabricated for wound healing as a medical device. And then we're also thinking about if we incorporate biologic therapeutics, then they would need to proceed through the FDA in the biologic pathway, which is longer and more expensive. And so we're going to use this pre-seed funding to help kind of map out what that pathway is going to look like for GelSana by getting additional data that we need to answer those questions. And then we can raise additional money with a clear pathway. And what we're looking to do is to accumulate enough data and expertise within GelSana that we've protected so that we can then go and look at other companies, so larger companies that may be interested in basically buying our technology and our IP and so forth from us, or even partnering with us to help get that into the clinic. And so part of it is, you look at from the science side, you're still trying to answer these scientific questions on how does my material work and how does it behave and what is my ultimate product, what does that look like? But also you need to think about the bigger picture of how do you actually walk that through the FDA process in order to ultimately get it to the clinic, and how much can the startup company actually raise and afford to do when you're looking at these big regulatory hurdles that you need to get through with the FDA? And then at what point do you try to find a larger company to partner with and help you get through the process, basically? So yeah, so these are all the issues that we're thinking about, and using that funding to help us answer, basically. So,
well, maybe just as a final wrap-up question for me, I understand, I just learned recently you went through the Becher Scholars Program at some point, and that was exciting to hear that. Just love to do a commercial for them for a minute, if you wouldn't mind, just maybe talk about that program and just maybe your thoughts on how other faculty across Colorado might get involved in that program.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an example of a foundation that has funded us, and they actually funded me. It was one of the first grants that I received as an assistant professor at School of Mines. I was able to secure funding from them towards the end of my first year at School of Mines. And so it's a Colorado-based foundation that they have a program where they are funding biomedical researchers, so basically at the assistant professor level, and they're really helping to try to grow that part of research, academic research within Colorado, and help to increase the biomedical research base that we have in the state of Colorado. And so that was a great program because so they provided 3 years of funding for a project, and in that particular one we were developing controlled drug release materials, and it provided us enough data that we were actually able to, at the end of that, apply for follow-on funding through NIH, and we were successful in using all of the data that we were able to obtain under the Becher funding to get a larger NIH grant, basically bring more biomedical funding into the state. And so they also support undergraduate students and teachers, but the particular branch of the program that I applied for is meant to stimulate biomedical research in the state of Colorado. So that was a great program too, and helped us get started. So
thank you for explaining all of that and for joining us today and spending your time sharing all of that insight. Innosphere, we do have a longstanding partnership with the Colorado School of Mines Office of Research and Technology Transfer, and I just know that the Innosphere Fund was excited to contribute to the growth of Dr. Krebs Technology and Company, because you're definitely an exceptional CEO and the kind of technical founder that anyone would want to invest in. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks.